this is a new segment we're going to do with Elliot. He is a historian of horror. Probably just knows way more than any of us. And so we wanted to bring him in and have him do a little feature segment. And why don't you tell us what we're going to talk about today?
Tonight, we're actually going to talk about something that and maybe it was a subconscious thing that I told you this, but today is actually, still have a couple hours left. This is the 206th anniversary of the night that Mary Shelley wrote the first lines that became Frankenstein.
Wow.
Yes. So it was just very ominous when I realized it after talking to you about this being the day that we were going to do that. I was like, holy cow, that's crazy. So
huge Mary Shelley fan.
Oh, good. That's
awesome. Gosh, yes. Oh my gosh. I'm a huge Mary Shelley dork from way back, like 15 years old, walking around with the book. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I love that.
Wow. Should I light a tulpa?
What?
No? Wait, no, I'm just saying if the dates are going to coincide, I might as well get some black magic up in here.
Good thing.
But yeah, so I was going to just riff a little bit on parts of what I do in my lecture. I've been doing my lecture. I created it and started the research for it back in 2012. And then in March of 2013, I did the first launch of it at the Wayne Public Library, my hometown. And I've been basically doing variations on it for the last 10 years. And it's expanded that I can have different programs now. And it's all been basically me narrating to all my pre-edited montages.
During the Second French Revolution, feminist author Mary Wollstonecraft suffered a broken heart from the father of her child Fanny Imlay and decided to nearly kill herself twice amongst the political chaos of France. In returning to London, she reunited with author William Godwin, who she'd met years ago at Thomas Paine's social party. Though hating each other years ago, Mary Wollstonecraft and William Godwin, a celebrated author, now hit it off, and they fell in love. After moving to 29 Polygon Street in Somerstown, London, Mary Wollstonecraft gave birth to Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin, the future Mary Shelley, between 5:30 a.m. and 11 p.m., August 30th, 1797.
The whole lecture has been basically kind of giving like a very in-depth roadshow history into the behind the scenes of all these classics that we know about and we talk about, and stuff, maybe films that we don't know anything about that are somewhat now subconsciously in the DNA of horror films. You know, or even regular films, you know, like you see just watching the Batman.
It's so fantastic.
Yeah.
Man.
Well, like I told you before we started recording, I have limited Frankenstein knowledge. So like, but when I started thinking about it, more and more movies kept coming to mind that are Frankenstein essentially, like Reanimator. And then there's a movie called Patchwork that came out not too long ago.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that.
It's pretty good. But then there's elements of that in a lot of movies that you wouldn't even think about it until you're like, you realize you haven't seen Frankenstein and you're trying to figure.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like Lisa was saying, Frankenhooker is like one variation of it, and then like even seeing your Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I mean, you can't subconsciously. I think there's a part of all of us, like in that Jungian Freudian way, we look at horror movies. That is like Leatherface has got a Frankenstein monster kind of archetype to it.
It's true,
and there's like just so many different ways that story still resonates, especially in the horror classics, which I guess we could argue for 1,000 years. I'm sure that maybe that's what's missing from horror today is that there's not a connection to the literary that there was in the 20th century with horror films, and today it's just, you know, this whole other era we're in.
Less of an adaptation more than its own thing.
There's the thing that's crazy is there are a ton of horror authors making new stuff that you've never even. It's really wild. I mean, some of it would be impossible to make into a film these days because it like some of these gonzo writers and weird horror writers that are out there. They just have concepts that are way beyond budget. You know, like you can't budget it. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see movies made based on modern horror novels and stuff. Like I don't know, they don't really do it that much.
No, you're right, and I'm like just like seeing snips of you guys from your programs and on TikTok. Just the films you're talking about, still like even the deep dives. You can almost be sure that if you read any horror books, that those guys from the 80s, like that made Basket Case, they read some horror classics. Like they read horror literature.
Without a doubt.
and it's just like I said, like a mini discussion is like, today you don't have a lot of young filmmakers that have ever read even maybe it.
Right. Yeah.
Don't even know. Who knows?
Yeah. And I mean, we used to have a segment on the show where one of our friends would interview different independent horror authors. And some of the stuff that was in these stories they would talk about, it just seems like it would make great new horror.
Yeah.
Because it's stuff that hasn't really been dealt with, like weird new concepts based on current society and how things are nowadays. But anyways, continue on.
So basically it was a couple years into doing my lecture, and I'm a filmmaker and a screenwriter, actor, blah blah blah, that my friend Josh Backer, who's an actor and entertainer in his own right, his dog was a wild, crazy dog, this yellow lab that was so adorable, but he just wouldn't be housebroken. And the final straw for the dog was that it chewed up a copy of Frankenstein.
The irony.
Yeah. So here I am lecturing on horror films, and since I was 6 years old, I've been obsessed with Lon Chaney and Boris Karloff and all these movies.
The classics.
Yeah, the classics. And I never read Frankenstein. And so I took this literally dog-eared copy right before he gave the dog away. And I would read Frankenstein while working at Domino's. And I was like, holy cow. I was like, this is much more than any movie version I've seen of it.
Wow.
And then, from there, I was like, I think I got to write an adaptation of it, which I then did over the next 3 years. I wrote my own more authoritative version of Frankenstein. Mm-hmm. And then from there, I just kind of deep dove into Mary Shelley and her life and what went into writing what I still think is one of the greatest, horror stories of all time.
What really seemed to happen June 16, 1816 at 2 a.m. is this. Byron's just recited the poem Christabel, and suddenly Percy Shelley becomes hysterically mad, screaming, seeing a ghostly form of a woman who has eyes where her nipples should be, transposed over the form of his wife, Mary Shelley. He's calmed down by Polidori, who slaps him around and puts him to bed before Mary starts writing the roots of what will become the most influential horror story of all time.
She was fascinating, wasn't she?
Yeah.
A pilgrim, so above her time, like amazing to me. I love reading the stories about her. And interesting to note, she was like, 15 when they got together and he was married and,
So, yeah. So depends on how deep you want me to get into this. But yeah, like you're saying, so Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin, Mary Wollstonecraft was her name. She was a huge feminist author, and she was the mother. And she was already ahead of her time as a celebrated author. She had a relationship with an American during one of the French revolutions, and gave birth to Fanny Imlay, who was her first daughter. And so she came back to England, kind of disgraced, suicidal even, and she met William Godwin, who was an author himself and a bookseller. And so they got married in 1797, and she then got pregnant with who would become Mary Shelley. And so in 1797, I think it was August 23rd or forgive me, I don't know the exact date right now, but it's somewhere towards later August. She was a Virgo. But Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin goes into labor, and because they can't get her doctor, they get another doctor, Dr. Louis Poignon, I think, who is not a licensed doctor, so to speak.
Oh, God.
And when she goes into labor, she basically has some major malfunctions, so to speak, with parts of the afterbirth of the placenta are stuck inside her, and they're literally starting to kill her. And
my God.
Yeah. So because she can't get the doctor that she's been training with, she gets this other doctor, and he doesn't do the right thing in removing the afterbirth. And she gets peripheral fever and septicemia. And it's those things that in the next 10 days of her life, it's only about 10 days or so that Mary Shelley technically knows her mother. She fights for her life, and she finally dies.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, because that was just common, in the 1800s?
Oh,
25% of children didn't grow up until they were 12 or something crazy. It was
you're very correct. It wasn't uncommon at the time, but it's still I've read so many books on Mary Shelley at this point.
Oh, I'm sure.
It seems like that if she had had her doctor or someone who knew better, that she might have survived, because this literally was a doctor that they grabbed from the local hospital when they couldn't get their own doctor.
Very common for the time. Yeah, very common for the time. So can I ask you, what do you think when they wrote, the night she wrote the book, you know, because you hear these tales of this drug-induced night with Shelley and Byron, and they're running around naked, and everybody's seen the movie Gothic, or, you know, if you have, I did, and I was like, oh my God, you know, because you saw so much in that movie. That movie was like my, you know, awakening, because I think I was like 10 when I saw it, and I was like, what am I seeing, you know? But like, what happened that night? Did they really like take a bunch of hallucinogenic, or like eat some shrooms and write this story? What do you think it was? I'm curious, because like that's what, you know, that's the consensus, is that they got like really high that night and they were running around naked doing all kind of crazy stuff. We've all seen the movie. We all know what happened. That's what I said.
Yeah, I was gonna say I've seen the movie. I don't know that is.
I know. So what do you think?
Story.
What happened?
Well, my answer could go on for hours, but
okay.
I'll try to shorten it. Come June 1816, which is the month in which she starts to write Frankenstein, it had already been about 2 years of her being with Percy Shelley, who was an atheist kicked out of Oxford. And basically the short of it is that in 1812, in November of 1812, Percy Shelley meets Mary Shelley for the first time. I think she's only like 16 at the time or something like that. He's like almost 20. He's broke, but he's got a large bit of a fortune, so to speak. So he's kind of becoming friends with William Godwin, her father, so that maybe he can like get some help. And William Godwin's helping him to maybe he'll get some of the Shelley kind of fortune, so to speak. And so it's over the next 2 years that Percy Shelley keeps visiting, and he's visiting the house of Mary Shelley, her stepsister, Claire Claremont, and her evil, wicked stepmother, Mary Jane Vile. So life sucks for Mary Shelley. Basically, she's had a very tough childhood, very tough teenage years with her stepmom. She never knew her mother. She's haunted by her mother. And so basically, come 1814, that's when, from most of the documents I've read in books, like Mary Shelley, I think she's 16 or so, maybe. Yeah, I think she's 16. She makes the first move on Percy Shelley, who's like 21 or so.
Wow.
And
nice.
According to her diary, her journal, which I read.
Wow.
They make love, I think, around sometime of June 1814 at her mother's grave at St. Pancras.
Oh, I love it.
Who hasn't done that? Am I right?
Yeah. So, and again, it sounds like something you would make up for a movie, but that's actually from a million sources. We know that did happen.
It's fitting.
And so, yeah. So by August of 1814, William Godwin finds out that basically his protege, Percy, is hooking up with his daughter. And so William Godwin wants to kill this guy. And Mary finds out she's pregnant. And so they run off with Claire Claremont. And so it's like this threesome of very bohemian values, free love, all that stuff. And so for the next 2 years, on and off, it's Claire Claremont, Mary Shelley, and Percy Shelley together. And there's another the pregnancy actually fails, and it has a stillborn, and that traumatizes Mary. And so we come to the part of May 1816, really is like the precursor to this wild, crazy night that we see in Gothic and Haunted Summer and all these other movies. And it's basically in May 1816, Claire Claremont has already had a one-night stand or so with Lord Byron. And she's one of a million groupies that is all about Lord Byron. And if you don't know Byron, he was
like the first rock star. Yeah.
Thank you.
The first one. Yes.
Absolutely, Lisa. Yeah. So he was, again, and that's what I try to explain in lectures. Like, this guy was like Harry Styles meets whoever. Like, he was.
And he was also literally a lord. Like, that was his deal, right? Like, it's not like he had any other, like, he had generational wealth and, like, yeah.
Yeah, that's
true. He was a lot of things. Yeah,
he was a lot of things, and I don't know what you know about him, Lisa, but he was pretty.
A lot.
He was banging his half sister Augusta Lee.
Yeah,
and his wife Anna Milbank, who was an heiress. She basically, I think, she accused him of having sodomy with other men, and she had him committed to an insane asylum. and
No
somehow
way.
he got out.
We've all had bad nights like that. Am I right?
Yeah, I don't know if we were
Ended
committed.
up in the loony bin. That's a first.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. I don't know if we got. Have
I'm sorry, I don't mean to laugh. Wow.
Yeah,
Wow,
have the grip
that's
socks.
good.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
I think now it's kind of like the scene in What About Bob, where they commit him, but then he's like entertaining the doctor so much they let him go. I think that's what happened with Byron. And so Byron, he comes out, he hooks up with Claire Claremont in March of 1816 when he's doing a play at the Drury Theater. And so now come May 1816, Claire Claremont's obsessed with him. She wants to get back into bed with him. He doesn't want anything to do with her, but she finds out that he's going to Lake Leman / Lake Geneva in May to the Hotel de l'Angleterre. And so she convinces Percy Shelley, Mary Shelley, and her son, I think her son's like 2 years old at this point, like, hey, let's go to Lake Geneva for the summer. And so it's really Claire Claremont who's the one that says, let's go there. They meet Lord Byron with John William Polidori, who's Byron's doctor. And very reluctantly, it's like, oh, God, here she is again. That's what Byron's thinking. But then he hits it off with Percy Shelley. And he's like, wow, I actually like this guy. And he already met Mary Shelley. And I think there's lots of rumors about this whole group, which they called the League of Incest while they were at the...
I was going to say, yeah.
But we know that Byron really liked Mary Shelley. Like, he probably did try to get in bed with her, maybe even at the Drury Theater. But all we know really 100% is that they had a mutual respect. And I from what I've read, which I've been obsessive with finding out every detail, I don't think she ever really hooked up with him. Wow. I think by this point she was already a mother. And there's more evidence to suggest that Percy was kind of going behind her back.
And hooking up.
Yeah, maybe with her approval, maybe with not, like kind of hooking up with Claire Claremont, her stepsister.
Man, this sounds like a blast. Sheesh.
You just don't know. You just don't know. He's not even tapping like 20% of it.
No, I don't. This is fantastic. I love this.
Yeah, they were like the original debauchery. You gotta love these stories. Why to be a fly on that wall, you know?
Yeah, they were definitely debauchery and free love, and that's why there was a lot of past things with Mary Shelley and some of Percy's friends that she did have affairs with, while he might possibly have been hooking up with her sister. So it is kind of still this open love, you know, kind of hippie idea in a way.
Do you think Percy, and not to interrupt, but do you think Percy and Byron were hooking up? Because there was that rumor that they were like so deeply in love, but they also, there's the rumor, you know, I mean, I think he wrote that poem to him that's very intimate, you know, it is. I mean, I think he describes his back, like the curve of his back.
No,
I wouldn't doubt it.
I don't know. I mean, Aaron, have you written a poem about a homeboy's curve of his back? I'm just saying.
You know, no, not yet, but who knows?
He's emailed me a couple poems.
Those were private, Dave. Shut up. But no, has this whole thing been opportunized on by like a series? Have they put out a TV series?
Oh, yeah.
So I've been writing one. So don't tell anyone.
Oh, I'll cut that out. Nobody will know about that.
I've been trying to write, you know, kind of a TV show for the last 2 years or so.
That's awesome.
It sounds just like one of those like. What's my wife watches them all the time. The Tudors, stuff like that.
Like Downton Abbey?
Yeah, like a period piece drama. Like there's a million of them about Anne Boleyn or whatever. You know, like but this would be more interesting than that.
I think that's why I've been writing it for a while, and I've been trying. Yeah, I think her life deserves a series, because
certainly.
Like, I'm just telling you the tip of the iceberg, and Lisa knows a lot of stuff too. That again is another part that's got there's just so much material for a full-on TV show on her life leading up to Frankenstein and after. But like Lisa said, there is a lot of evidence, which I'm always digging for that dirt, that there was some kind of relationship of there's definitely an infatuation between Percy and Byron, and Percy definitely was obsessively infatuated by Byron. And
as you would be, right? Yeah.
Yeah, we know that it was more of like they were a lot of respect for each other, but it was really, you know, Byron was kind of more the alpha male to Percy. And there was even a time leading up to the night of June 1816 where Percy and Byron are out on a boat, and I think Byron falls over, something falls over, and Percy like wants to die to show that he's going to save him. Like he wants to die this heroic melodramatic death by drowning in the lake. And it's completely ridiculous. Like there's no reason for it. And Byron like quickly like brings him back on the boat and is like, snap out of it. But
snap out of it.
Yeah. So it's just one of those many instances where like Percy's going out of his way to impress him. And I didn't know about the poem, but it just totally makes sense from everything I've read.
I wouldn't put it past him.
So basically bringing up to June 1816, what's been happening for the last couple of nights, this is a very rainy summer because Mount Tambora erupted the year before. And because of the eruption of this volcano, the ash has basically ruined the atmosphere across Europe. And so it is a cold, wet, horrible summer in 1816. And this is a huge element to why this happens with the writing of these stories, because they're inside for all these nights and days, just rainy thunderstorms and everything. So Byron, some point in the beginning of June, starts saying, let's have a ghost story contest every night. So he starts reading from the Phantasmagoriana, which is this famous, maybe not famous, but it's a German book of ghost stories and spooky stories, so to speak. So they're telling stories from that. And then eventually at some point he says, I want to have a contest where we all come up with our own horror story.
That's cool.
And basically, like Lisa was saying before, like there is a lot of wine drinking. There's definitely some books I read, official books on her biographies, have mentioned opium smoking, that there's definitely been a mix of all those things happening for the last couple of weeks leading up to June 16, 1816. And they're definitely partying because, I mean, it's around 2 a.m. when it's official in her journal and everything that in the middle of this ghost story, she comes up with the idea of, you know, a medical student of the hollow arts kneeling before a yellow, hideous phantom engine of life. I think those are like somewhat the first line she writes.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
And what happens before that is that Byron's telling this poem, Christabel, which I don't think is his story. And this, again, would be great for its own short film. And basically, Christabel is this poem about this woman seducing another woman or a man. And then when he gets home, he finds out that the woman's really a demon. And something about this makes Percy Shelley go hysterical. And like Lisa was saying in the movie Gothic, he sees this vision of a woman who has eyes for nipples. And it's Ken Russell illustrates it perfectly in the movie. And that really happened. He goes crazy that they have to give him laudanum, which is like a form of like, you know, Valium.
Opium. Yeah.
Right.
And so it's when he calms down is that it's like, okay, the freak's gone. That's when it's really Byron, Mary Shelley, and John William Polidori, the doctor. They're the one, they start writing their stories. And it's around 2 a.m. that night that she starts writing Frankenstein. And then William Polidori, who still does not get half the credit due to him, basically starts writing the first vampire story in history. And that is The Vampire. And John William Polidori starts writing at the same time. He's definitely been smitten with Mary Shelley the whole summer, but she sees him as a friend. She calls him Polly Wally. But again, he starts writing The Vampire that same night, and they become kind of close pen pals because it's for that next 2 years or so that they're writing notes to each other in letters, comparing how they're doing on the drafts of these two, you know, stories that'll become huge influences on the rest of horror as we know it. Mm. And so that's basically what happens, you know, June.
So, Elliot, were any, like, you mentioned atheism before, was anyone necessarily originally, like, religiously affiliated and or were persecuted because of what they were doing at the time, or?
Yeah, there was, like, Percy had been kicked out of Oxford for writing a pamphlet on atheism. And he had been definitely involved with some kind of like little bit of interest in the occult, but this pamphlet got him booted. And at that time, which is another huge influence on what goes into Frankenstein, there was this whole boom in science where you could show up for these public dissections of corpses.
Yes.
So gruesome. So gruesome.
Oh, man.
So,
dude, they were just seeing what worked. They were just poking around, seeing what worked.
Somebody had
and
to,
they're like,
right?
Hey, come over. It was like a free concert. Yeah, come over. Hey, I know.
Yeah.
I know what's going on.
This broad's got a headache. We're gonna poke it open and see it bleed her out.
Yeah. So they're showing like that's happening. That Percy goes to one, Byron attended one, and that talk with all these people on what happens after life and reanimation. That's a huge hot topic, so to speak, of this time. And this whole haunted summer at the Villa Diodati and Maison Chupez, where the two parties are staying and bed hopping. This is a huge discussion. They're constantly talking about this. Is this possible? And I have to say, going back to your question, Dave, it seems like there's a lot of atheism in the whole group. Like, I don't think most of them really believe in God. I think Mary Shelley, from what I've read, it seems like the death of my mother really took away a lot of those traditional beliefs on afterlife. And
because I wasn't sure whether Mary was brought up in a certain way or, you know, what kind of community, because I mean, God was obviously, I mean, in 1800s Europe, I mean, that was it, you know what I mean? And like even I'm sure there was a satanic panic then, you know, like I'm sure it was harder and faster than it was now, you know?
Yeah, I think like her upbringing was a very dysfunctional one with, you know, she had a half sister by Fanny Imlay who was a very sad soul herself, was kind of melancholy and wasn't really happy. And, you know, she never knew her mother either because Mary Shelley and Fanny shared the same mother, Mary Wollstonecraft. So she had somewhat of a friendship with her. Then suddenly Claire Claremont came into her life when she was like 4 or 5 years old. Then she had another stepbrother. So she's brought up in this bookstore at Skinner Street in England. And, you know, it's a famous bookstore where people come to visit. And that's how Percy Shelley finds William Godwin. But it's very dysfunctional that Mary Jane Vile Claremont is her stepmother, and they just do not get along. And like in the Elle Fanning movie on it, which I think is just mostly horrible and wasn't really researched.
It was so cheesy. It really was.
Oh, yeah. So, but the only part of that movie that was researched was like she does go to Scotland when she's 13 because her eczema is so painful. She goes away to meet a doctor, and she goes away to a school there. And that's a very big part of her because she learns a lot while going away and becoming friends with one of her friends.
I'm sure, like, education in and of itself was pretty rare, too.
Yeah.
Like, for someone to be as educated as she was, to be able to read and write was still, like, I don't know, you know, like not, and especially being a person of science, you know, I'm not sure when people, like, thought about the humors, like, maybe the humors were still around, like the 4 humors. Like, you know, people just characterize like yellow bile or like whether shit that came out of you was black. It's just so wild to just think about that time, and then also being a literary figure, you know, eventually. And I'm sure that took time as well.
Yeah, Frankenstein took then, it was technically, I think it was technically December 2017 is really when it's first printed. But there's a lot of, I mean, there's a million details I don't want to bore you with, but there's a lot of things that go wrong and right where people think that Percy had written it. And so there's a lot of fights she has to get out there to prove, no, a woman wrote this book.
Yeah. That's the other one too.
Yeah. So she still had an uphill battle, even having, her mother was famous and very respected as this, you know, revolutionary feminist who had written 2 different books. And so, you know, it helped her reputation a little bit, but at the same time, that reputation was also backfiring on her when she goes off of Percy, because everyone knew these families, like the Shelleys, the Byrons, the Godwin, they were all very well known. And so it became well known the Godwin sisters are gallivanting with this, you know, guy kicked it. So I don't know what the newspapers were like back then, but Twitter was definitely trending.
And it was mostly oral history. I mean, when you talk about these ghost stories too, like, I mean, this is all playing phone. Like, you're just, it just happened that someone binded them in a book, and now people circulate them. Yeah. And it's just kind of incredible that that these people have this community, this like almost microcosm of amazing literature and just this boom of intelligence that could thrive then. It just I can't fathom that. It's strange.
Yeah, it is amazing, and again, it's by like 1818, I think, is when Frankenstein is first published with her name attached, and then it still goes through a lot of revisions. Like she changes in the book. Victor, I think the first version has Victor and Elizabeth, his lover. I think in the first version they're cousins. Then she changes it to being like it's just an orphan that the mother found, and then William Polidori, he finally publishes The Vampire in 1819, I think. And it's the same thing. They think that Byron wrote The Vampire because Byron was using his connections to get Polidori the book deal.
And he had a penis. Right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So, but Polidori is just a sad guy because he dies in August of 1819, I think. It's either he committed suicide or he died.
Didn't he kill himself? Yeah, the consensus is he killed himself, right? Yeah.
It's funny because I've read so many different.
It's mysterious, yeah.
It is mysterious. You're right, because I've read so many biographies on Byron, Percy, and Mary, and it seems like you don't know no one knows if he killed himself. Was it a form of cyanide? Was it alcoholism? But whatever it was just a very sad, lonely way that he went.
And by all accounts, he was a pretty good guy, right? I mean, out of the group, wasn't he like the nice one, the more tame one? Like, I feel like in the orgy, he'd be the one taking the pictures. You know what I mean? Like, not the one joining in, doing the reach around. He'd be the picture guy, you know?
He's the guy over there folding people's clothes up. He's folding people's clothes up, gathering their things.
Like, making everything clean, you know, mopping things up while they go along, that type of thing, you know?
Making sure everybody's got a water.
Him, you know?
Hey, are you cool, man? Are we cool?
Make sure you drink
I think
water.
you're all right. Yeah. Sadly for him, yes, I think he was a very sad, tortured soul, and he was the nice guy that was left out of the gangbang, I guess.
I mean, it seems to me like they all were too.
Yeah, right? They're kind of tragic
they
figures,
all are,
aren't
yes,
they?
absolutely.
Yeah, all of them. Yeah, especially
they're artists.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. They all end up like Mary and Claire survive everyone because then in July 1822, Percy goes off on a boat. I forget the name at this point, but he goes off on a boat in July for this, again, another melodramatic voyage. I'm going to go sailing off the Gulf of Spezia near Italy. And he dies at sea. And the only thing that survived is like a parts of his jaw. And there was a poem that he wrote to her that they find in his corpse. And when it washes up on the shore because of the quarantine laws, because there's some form of plague or something going on this year, they have to burn his corpse.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, because there's that very famous painting, right?
Yeah. Wow, you know your stuff, Lisa.
I do. I do.
That's hard because I had to Google to find a picture that would go with that for my lecture. So that's amazing. You know that there's that painting.
Wait, what's the painting? What does it depict?
Oh, it's haunting. It's haunting. I'll let him describe it, but it's haunting and it's poignant. If you know the story about them, it will stick with you because it's a very haunting painting. Yeah. But basically, they're cremating at sea, right? Isn't that what it is on the beach? Yeah. And there's a very beautiful, I don't exactly know what he says, but he says something very beautiful and haunting about watching as he like slowly withers away type thing. It's very poignant. I'm not doing it justice at all. So, I don't want to embarrass myself in front of the expert over here, but No,
that's amazing. I've never met anyone that do that. There's a painting of that moment and I had to Google that because once I started lecturing, I was like, how do I explain half these things? Because when you Google, they get Claire Claremont's picture wrong. They say that Mary Shelley's Claire Claremont. And then to find how do I get an image to show that sums up him getting cremated? And that painting was one of the few things that came up.
Yes. I bet you're really, really good at Googling shit nowadays. Like, because I know that from my personal experience in looking for material for the show and putting up images, because sometimes you're talking about something very specific and you need a reference point. And sometimes you just cannot find it at all. I mean, and you'll try typing in the weirdest shit and eventually you land on it. But
you get lucky, right?
Googling shit is it's a skill. That's all. So
I have a question about Frankenstein. I have to just ask you. So at the core, so many people describe it as, a God versus man journey, a battle between, man and, what he thinks is his God, his creator, right? What do you think, out of curiosity? Because it's a very in-depth book. It's so much more than just a horror story.
Yeah.
To me, it's such a God complex story, if that makes sense. So I'm interested to see what your take is.
Well, I think I have Leslie Kiplinger is an incredible annotated author. He's done Frankenstein, he's done Dracula, and I think he's even done a Lovecraft one. So these are amazing. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So I got that version. I got an old version from the library, and then I got this one when I started writing my version of Frankenstein. And from that and all the books I've read on Mary Shelley and whatever comes across my way, I think that the story has all those definitely themes in it, but I think the story is really Mary Shelley talking about and exercising her own guilt over killing her mother.
Wow.
I think that is amazing horror passion, so to speak. It's about how the death, this man creates something and the thing is dead, and this dead thing then wreaks havoc on his family and his life, and then the guilt of the creator. I think it all goes back to how Mary sees herself as having, in her mind, killed her mother at childbirth.
Right.
And I think
in grieving.
Yeah. And again, there's no, yeah. I think that's
wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah, that's what and all that other stuff is there, because I think that's all the talk of the day and what they're talking about and the politics and recreation. I think that is all part of it, but I think the heart and soul of it. And if you read the book and you really get into reading the book, there's just a lot of instances where you can see she's almost like blatantly saying, like, this is about me and how I feel about my mother.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So agree.
It's so incredible how things can be translated too into something completely different. Like, I feel like this one story has just been mined content over, hundreds of years, and it's still so special. But at the same time, like it's so deviated from the intention, I guess. Because we have these massive studio films now. I'm bringing up I Frankenstein, the Aaron Eckhart action movie.
God, yeah.
Victor Frankenstein, the James McAvoy, and I think Dan Radcliffe's in it as Igor. It's just so strange for something so at its base being such an emotional story, and then someone just taking it and just running with it, and everyone has their own version, and it's just really special.
It's iconic.
It's just, I still think it's one of the most, I think it might be for me, I think it's the best horror story ever written. And I don't think we would have horror today without Frankenstein. I think Dracula has got everything in Dracula, and I could go on another show about that. But everything that Bram Stoker creates in Dracula, it's going back to Shelley. It's going back to the Frankenstein, the structure of Frankenstein, and especially just a little bits of letters that start off Frankenstein when, the captain, if you've seen the De Niro movie, the Aidan Quinn character, that's the start of the novel is with that character. He's writing a letter to his sister about how he's been stuck in the Arctic Circle. It's been a shit show. I don't think we'll ever find anything new. And then halfway through these letters, he finally says, you never believe this story of this man we picked up in the Arctic saying that he's running from his demon. And then from there, Frankenstein, the novel, begins telling, who is this guy, Frankenstein? Who is he running from? And again, that is part of Dracula, the book. The book Dracula, if you read it, it's
that's another one, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing, but it's a lot of letters and it's a lot of boredom.
Well, I'll tell you what, a lot
of boring parts to the book.
I'll tell you what, Elliot, it's been great having you on, because you basically backed a tow motor into my mind and just dumped a bunch of info in there that I had no idea about. But wow. I think you'll be a great addition to what we do here.
Thank you.
And clearly, you and Lisa have you could like you could have your own thing, like
I guess,
you guys could just go back and forth, and it would be.
I was like, are you feeling this too? Are you feeling it?
I mean, I never met anyone that knows that there's a painting of Percy Shelley.
I know so much useless information, like honestly, and like you're talking about the Bram
It's not
Stoker.
useless.
Like, let's
Don't
go
call
down that rabbit hole right now, because like I could do that too. Like Lovecraft, all of it. I could do anything.
Oh, Lovecraft. Yeah, I'm sure we could do a bunch of shows.
Anything. Yeah,
So,
yeah.
see,
I'm not your typical gal, man.
As long as you guys are cool with it, I'll probably couple your segments together because
That's awesome. Yeah,
I just by happenstance, you guys work out really well. So
I love it. I think we got good chemistry. Let's do it, man.
Yeah.